But now we have a really interesting documentary looking at the scandal in a different way, looking at those who have suffered and those who were involved in pushing the drugs at ground level, particularly in West Virginia. And it's made by an Irish director, Sue Connolly. Overdosed is the name of the documentary. Sue, thank you very much for taking the time to join us here on The Last Word.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
This is an extraordinary American story, but tell us about the particular angle you've taken and the extraordinary access you've had to those who've been involved at a local level in effectively pushing the drugs on their neighbours.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's such a big story. It was really hard to try and tell it because it's massive. So I decided to just channel it through this little town and use the experiences of the local people there and the local doctor there to try and get my message across. And, I was really fortunate that I had access to these incredible people that were so ready to talk about it. They were just desperate to get the word out because they had been living with addiction and suffering because of addiction for so long. And they just felt like they were suffering in the darkness, so they really were eager to tell me their story. I was just a filmmaker, a lone filmmaker. I'm a kind of one-man show. So I just showed up with my camera and they, were not intimidated by the way I was filming. So they just opened up to me, luckily, and I got some incredible insight.
You did? And how did you manage to find this small town of Petersburg in rural West Virginia? Why did you pick it?
I didn't pick Petersburg. I just met the main character in the film, Brie. So I met her through an online group. We were talking about addiction and people who had suffered loss, because lost loved ones. And we just started chatting, and she wrote to me, and, she's like, I was in federal prison, and I just came out, and I can't take it anymore, and, I was a drug dealer, but now I'll never go back to that world. And I just found her story to be really compelling. And so I decided, okay, I should go meet this girl. She's really interesting and she's really eager to talk, just like I was.
And she's very articulate and almost charismatic in a way as well, isn't she?
Yeah, that she is. I mean, I was actually so surprised when I finally met her in person about how lovely and sweet and kind and articulate she was, and, how it kind of turned the stereotype of a drug dealer on its head, really, when you meet somebody like Brie.
What also struck me, though, was, as well as the addiction, was the poverty of these areas in the United States of America, and how people come to turn to opioids because of the poverty and poor parenting and a whole load of social issues which gave rise to this crisis.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the poverty, I tried not to play too much, show that too visually, because there's a stereotype surrounding this part of Appalachia, because of the poverty porn, they say, and, because of hillbilly heroin, and, people kind of tend to dismiss them in a way. But there is incredible poverty there, and there's incredible hopelessness. I mean, it does feel like you're cut off from the rest of the country. I mean, there's areas in Appalachia that don't even have phone service or internet access. I mean, it does feel like another world, and the poverty did play a big part. I mean, these communities were targeted because it was ripe for drug abuse. I mean, for various reasons. There was coal miners who had physical labor jobs, and they were prescribed pain pills. And then also what happens is when you're over-prescribing, then you have the town kind of turned into drug dealing, because that was a way to make money. To pay rent, you would sell your prescription. And it's very hard when you're living, trying to make ends meet, and you see an opportunity to sell your prescription, and that would pay your rent for the month. So you can understand why people did that.
Of course, a lot of these opioids were marketed as legitimate painkillers, and yet they became abused by the users, overused, and then often because of a lack of money, then they turned to heroin as a cheaper alternative. And that comes across very much from the documentary Overdosed as well, about the way that the supplies coming from Baltimore into this particular area, starting another epidemic, this time of heroin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That was another point I really tried to get across, because people don't really relate to pain pills or pills that you get from a doctor, and they don't really equate that with like heroin. That would be intravenous drug use usually. But it was a very easy step to take when you're being prescribed such lethal painkillers that are just as addictive as heroin, and sometimes even more potent. So it was a very easy step to take, to go from one to the other, because when the pill mills and the doctors were shut down by the DEA, people did go to the streets. I mean, grandmothers were going to the streets. You know, old ladies were driving around trying to get pills from street dealers. I mean, this happened all over Appalachia and all over that part of America.
Let's hear a clip from the documentary. We've mentioned Brie, who is, in many respects, the sort of the star of the story. Let's hear a little bit of her.
God, I was like the worst drug dealer you could have. I just wanted everybody to be happy, you know. I gave more than I sold. Most of the heroin went here. We were selling the pills, and the heroin just started happening. It's like everybody's selling their soul to the devil, but the devil was me. Death was my first choice, but it didn't work out, so I went to alcohol. And I became the party girl, and then I became the drug dealer, and then I went to prison. So it's just been nothing but shit. That transition from being in prison for years and coming home, you're so excited to see everybody, and then what you see is not pretty. People were telling me on the phone that it was so much worse than it was before with the drugs, and they were right. We got that old railroad blues. There is a way out. It doesn't matter how deep you are. Like, I was homeless. I was in shelters. I was living in the street. I was stabbing people. I had guns in my face. You know, I never thought that I was ever going to be anything but that girl. I'm just surrounded by lost souls. That's always been my kind of people. Maybe I'm the only one that really came out of that. I'm still a lost soul. I still don't know where I belong. I don't know who I am, really.
Mary Sue Connolly, what is the future for Brie, do you think, and for the others who you did find for this documentary?
Well, Brie is doing great, thank God. I mean, you know, it's really hard because she's back in West Virginia now, and you know, but she's really a survivor. She's a very strong woman, and she's doing really well. She's happily married. She's got 2 kids, and you know, and she's trying her best to help people in the community now. I think she finds, you know, great comfort in reaching out to help people. It's her way of giving back. But it's harder for some of the other people that, you know, had a very strong history of addiction, because they're confronted with, you know, dealers all the time in their neighborhood. You know, they're not leaving that town, or they can't really relocate, you know, for many reasons, especially economic reasons. So, you know, that temptation is constantly there, you know, so you have to constantly work on it. And then with COVID, it just became a lot harder for people to maintain their sobriety, you know, because there was no AA meetings or NA meetings, and, you know, there was no in-person contact. And I think people really suffered because of that. And overdoses are actually at a record high. They've gone up 40% in West Virginia in 2020. So it's really sad. But I mean, most of the people in the film are doing well, but not everyone. Yeah.
And yet this was a topic of all things, former President Donald Trump seemed genuinely motivated to deal with this particular issue. He had some personal experience, I think, of family members. He seemed to make it something of a campaign. But has state government in West Virginia or federal government done anything of any real significance to try and take on the issues involved?
I mean, I thought so too, you know. I did think that, because it didn't start, you know, during the Trump administration. It started long before that. And it did seem like it was an issue that he was willing to address and confront and face head on. But I mean, there is a lot more rehabilitation, but that was because of the drug settlement money. There was a lot of litigation with the drug companies. So that did bring more recovery opportunities into places like West Virginia. But, you know, as you know, overdoses are up so much now because of COVID, and things just are still in a downward spiral. And the fentanyl has hit the drug market, which is a synthetic opioid, which is 50 to 100 times stronger than morphine. So now that is being mixed in with both heroin and cocaine, and it's just killing people. I mean, it's just like Russian roulette if you do any kind of, you know, street drugs now. You know, it could go any way. You know, you just can't. But apparently the fentanyl is just flooding in. I just can't believe that so little has been done to stop it. I mean, no doubt there are efforts that are made, but it's just flooded the whole country, and it's astonishing, really.
How much of a shock did this all come to you as?
Oh, a shock. You mean making the film or being in West Virginia?
Finding the extent of these difficulties for people, what they have to go through.
Oh, yeah, well, thank you. It was absolutely shocking. I mean, I had lived in New York, and I worked in media even, you know, and I read the papers, you know. I mean, I should have known what was going on, but when I actually went there and started my film early 2017, like what I found was absolutely shocking to me. Like everybody I met had been personally affected by the drug epidemic, had lost somebody or had a family member who was struggling with addiction. I mean, everybody was burdened by this catastrophe. And yeah, I could not believe it wasn't on the front page of every paper, you know, on the news. I mean, I just couldn't believe it was getting so little attention. So that was my point. That was why I made the film.
Mary Sue Connolly, thank you very much for taking the time to join us here on The Last Word of Today FM. Overdosed is the documentary. It's having a screening next Wednesday night as part of the IFI Documentary Festival, which is running from the 20th to 26th of September, and tickets are available from ifi.ie. Mary Sue Connolly, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
The Last Word with Matt Cooper.